Well, good day, viewers. I wonder where we plugged the scanner in on this one. 1946 Ford. It's a pretty nice looking car. V8. It's customized, obviously. It's got a 70s drivetrain in it, I think. 302, I believe, carbureted. But it's here because the left rear wheel brake drum was overheating the other day. It was actually towed in. So we're going to pull the wheel off this thing and have a look at it. Look at the chrome on this thing. When they used to use real chrome. Wow. Well, let's put it up in the air and pull this wheel off and brake drum off, and hopefully it's just a brake return spring or something like that that fell off. Well, we're checking for play. Doesn't seem to be play in the wheel bearing, and the axle bearing, but the drum is very tight to turn, especially going forward. So let's pull the wheel off and have a look. Well, I can't get the drum off. Oh, here we go. I wonder if somebody put the parking brake on. Drum has definitely been hot. It's blue. I don't see anything. Let's get a trouble light here. Well, I can't see anything wrong. This doesn't have a self-adjuster. It's got an adjuster, but not a self-adjuster. And the parking brake lever is not applied. At least I don't think it is. Why is it so tight? Springs haven't fallen off. Equalizer's in place. So this equalizer's not even pressing on the shoe right now. It's up against the anchor up here. No play in the axle bearing. It's a mystery. Well, let's adjust the brakes up. So although the park brake lever is pretty tight, these are all custom built cables and stuff, because this is not the rear end that came in this car originally. I'm pretty sure that this spring should be the other way around, so that this self-adjuster, or it's not a self-adjuster, it's just an adjuster, is requires effort to turn it, because right now you can simply turn this. So I'm going to flip this spring around, put it this way so that this is up against it, or at least give that a shot. So put the spring in the other way so that now when you adjust it, it doesn't walk out by itself. I can't see that happened, but it's a possibility. We're going to readjust the brakes and then check the other side to make sure it doesn't have the same issue. I took the plug off from the back so we can go through the back. I'm sure this drum will be okay. Yeah, I'll put the tire and wheel on so that it holds the drum square, and then adjust the brakes. So this is how you tighten up the brakes. But that spring rubbing on the star wheel now prevents it from arbitrarily turning by itself. I think that spring is supposed to be on top like that. just tighten it up until it won't turn the wheel. And then back it off. Oh, I checked the wheel cylinder, by the way, it's not sticking. Now, mind you, this drum might be warped now from overheating. The customer did say it was very hot. Well, we're going to let it go like that. I'm going to check the other side and make sure that spring's on the same place. So again, this spring is supposed to be on the other way so that the spring keeps this adjuster from turning easily. So we're going to flip it around, hook it in here and over there so that the body of the spring up against the back of the adjuster. I'm 99% sure that's the way it's supposed to be. Gonna clean up the shoes while we're here. So I decided to take this car for a ride, and looking at the gauges in this thing is amazing, but I hear some funny noises. You know what? I bet you that axle bearing's failing in the right rear. Let's back up. Crunchy noises going on there. Let's try it. No check length. For sure, something's creaking in there. So we're going to pull that axle out and have a look at that bearing. So I had a helper listening outside the car, and the crunching noise is definitely coming from this wheel. Now there's no vertical play, but that doesn't mean the bearing's not failing. So I've taken the four 3/8 fine thread nuts off the back through the access hole here. And normally you need a slide hammer to pull the axle out. This one doesn't look like we're going to need it. So let's get the axle out and see what it looks like. Well, I don't think there's supposed to be pieces of wheel bearing falling out of here. Yeah, that's the pieces of the wheel bearing. All right, so we're going to use this slide hammer. Pull the bearing out. Yeah, I'd say that's foobarred. Yeah, I'd say that bearing is a little bit compromised. Now it's quite interesting, the axle seal wasn't leaking unless the rear axle fluid is low to the point where, I mean, there's axle fluid in here, but nevertheless we need a bearing, a retainer, and a seal. Wow, I can't even turn this bearing. It's funny, it didn't feel rough when I was turning it on the hoist, but whatever, it is what it is. So there's the bearing pressed off. You have to split the bearing retainer with a cold chisel, then use a split flange to press the bearing off. This is pretty much failed completely. Now we're going to measure the inside race and the outside diameter. I measured the outside diameter and it didn't come, but mind you, it may be out of round from getting hot. So we're going to measure the shaft here and compare that to the spec. Apparently this rear end is out of a 59 Ford station wagon. So according to the dimensions, it's an SKF RW207-CCRA. It's serviced with the retainer, but the seal is separate. I'm trying to source one locally. It's out of town so far. So all of my research indicates that the SKF number for the bearing is an RW207-CCRA. I've got one coming from Winnipeg, should be overnight, but tomorrow won't get ordered until Monday, so I won't see it till Tuesday, and one coming from out of town. We want to have one for the other side in case we need it. And the seal is a CR 13738, and I've got two coming from Winnipeg overnight, should be here Tuesday morning sometime. So I think it'd be wise to at least have them on hand in case the other one fails too. So I managed to get one bearing. It comes with the retainer and two seals. I've got another bearing on order just in case the other side has a problem in the future. We're not going to have one in stock. I'm going to compare this new bearing. Looks pretty close. I'm going to clean up this axle shaft with some emery cloth and press it back together. This is what I like to do. I like to put the axle shaft in a vise, put some emery cloth around it with some penetrating fluid or engine oil on the shaft, and then wrap a piece of electrical wire several times around the emery cloth, or you could use 400 grit sandpaper as well. I'm mainly concerned about where the seal rides because there's a mark in there. There's some burrs on there where that bearing pressed off. Let's see what that looks like. There's a little groove here, a scratch for the bearing pressed off. I think that's probably adequate. Yeah, there is some minor imperfections in where the seal runs, but let's have a look. This scratch is, the seal runs down here, so we're not worried about that. That's not too bad. There's some little pitting in axle shaft, but we're not going to get rid of it. Okay, don't forget to put the bearing retainer on before you, the flange retainer on before you press the bearing on. So I'm using an old bearing race that's slightly bigger than the axle shaft to press the bearing on with the press here, and then push the retainer on after the fact. The bearing goes on until it bottoms out. That's it. Now we put the bearing retainer on and repeat that. So there's the bearing retainer pressed on. There's a little bit of pitting in there, but the seal should run down here. We're going to measure the distance between here and this bearing retainer and make sure we put the seal in a few thousandths of an inch deeper, just so it's not rubbing on this. Because if you look in this housing, there's no bottom to the housing. In other words, that seal can go in. If you put that seal in too far, it'll be before the axle flanges. Gotta clean that dirt out of there. So I packed the inside of the seal with grease where that garter spring is, so that it doesn't pop off, or less likely to pop off. So I don't have a proper seal installer which puts tension on the seal lip. And I put a little bit of thread sealant, Teflon sealant, you could use silicone, around the outside circumference of the seal. Now we're going to find something to use as a driver. So there's a seal installed. I use these universal seal drivers, or bearing race drivers. And I measured the width of the bearing and the retainer, and it's 1.275. So from this surface, with this pressed in to the surface of the seal here, it's 1.28. So I got about 5 thou clearance. I don't want that bearing retainer rubbing against it, and I want that seal as close to the axle bearing as I can get it. It doesn't go in until it bottoms, because if it did, it would be too deep. And you can't put 2 seals in there, there's not enough room. Well, there it is back together. Turns nice and smooth now. These bearing retaining nuts, the spec that I found on an older one, because I don't have information for 59, said 20 to 40. So I put them at 45. They're 3/8 fine thread bolts, and they look like they're a hard bolt. So, and I put a little Loctite on the nuts, because they're lock nuts as well. So we're ready to put the wheel or the drum back on and adjust the brakes and put it back together.